Hi, hello, and welcome. My name is Josh, and it's been a hot second since I sat down to record a YouTube video. That's mostly because, well, I've been rather busy, but I wanted to take some time today to talk to you guys about Louisville and my tournament result. And mainly because I want to share the deck list with you guys, and I know a lot of you all are here for the Dragapult content. And so this is my current Dragapult 60 that I ran to Louisville. I did only go 5-3, so just short of day 2. Kelsey also played this deck, my wife, and she did very well as well. Started off super hot with a 4-1 record, but unfortunately hit some bad matchups to round out her day. But the super awesome, cool thing that I do want to talk about is that this deck list, or I should say a modified version that I came up with for the expected meta at the Juniors division versus the Masters division, and I'll talk about the changes between the two in just a moment. But Luke G, one of the students that I coach and work with, managed to fight his way to a top 4 finish in juniors. And don't let the word juniors fool you. He had to grind to get there, and unfortunately an item lock bayonet Dustmore deck stopped his progression, but we could not be prouder of the people who made it to the finals and the winner for juniors. But Luke G making his way to top 4 for the first time and not the last time in the juniors division. Definitely keep an eye out for him with Dragapult. So let's take a second and talk about those differences between our deck lists now and just get that out of the way, why don't we? So the core of the deck list between what we played was the same. The only difference here was that we cut one of the psychic energies for Luke because we didn't expect there to be that many handheld fans and problems that would arise from decks that ran handheld fans such as Iron Thorns, such as Pidgey Control, and such as like Cornerstone, Noibat, like Noivern lock decks, those types of decks, those, stally control archetypes, and especially Blocklax. We didn't expect there to be too many of those in the juniors division, whereas on Masters, we thought it would be all over the place. And so what I did for Masters in the deck that I crafted was add a Force Psychic Energy because that allows you to attack a bit more easily with Radiant Alakazam. But what we did for Luke and added consistency because the Force Psychic Energy is absolutely a tech card. You should be playing Luke's version of the deck that cut the Force Psychic Energy or Earthen Vessel, because Earthen Vessel allows you to basically treat your 4 Arvens as an extra Crispin in the deck, because you can Earthen Vessel for the, or you can Arven for the Earthen Vessel along with the EXP share, and then your attachment for turn all of a sudden becomes twice as good so long as you have a bench Pokemon ready to share that energy with the EXP share. EXP share is a crucial component in this deck, and it really allows you to streamline the process of creating Dragapult EXs in the mid to late game, which can be one of the areas that this deck struggles with to streamline attackers, but you usually control the tempo of the game very well. It's just getting the attacks off in the late game, and while EXP share allows you to do that much more easily, especially in conjunction with Crispin. And the other change between R60 and Luke 60 was that he did not want to play Palpad. Well, he wanted to, but we couldn't find room for it, because he wanted to play Manaphy as an extra basic Pokemon in there. And again, the reason that we didn't play Manaphy in the Masters division is because we weren't expecting there to be too many Palkia Dusknoir decks at the tables we expected to be at. While we always go into a tournament with the goal of winning the event, you have to be prepared to face the different stages of the event. Like, you have the opening 3 rounds where you can face just about anything, and from there, you can kind of expect how your tournament to go. And so after those first 3 rounds, if you're at the top tables, yeah, there's probably going to be some Palkia Dusknoir around you, but the idea and how you set up and approach that matchup, regardless of playing Manaphy, stays the same. Manaphy is just a comfort card for Luke, and Luke is a junior at the end of the day, so I'm more than happy to include those comfort cards in those deck lists that I build and construct with him in mind. But the idea is, well, you're going to need to get 4 basic Pokemon down anyway against Palkia Dusknoir, because even with Manaphy down, they're going to probably ghost it away with Dusknoir, and then Greninja still has the added effect of taking 2 more prizes. So the Manaphy is just like, okay, you have to target it, but if they don't get the ghost down, then you are kind of punished for not running the Manaphy. But if you run the Manaphy, you can have some clunkiness against other decks. So it's just something to kind of consider and kind of metagame relevant and reliant on how you do that. But that's the differences between our decks, and I'm very happy with the way it performed. The deck did great overall. There was a few mistakes and a few non-games that I'll talk about when we go over the matchups here in just a moment. But all in all, very happy with the 60. Kelsey asked me if there's anything I would change on the way back from Louisville, and I think the only thing I would say is, well, Handheld Fan was not as relevant as a matchup card, like in matchups that we hit, and so Earthen Vessel would have been nice to have in our own deck, but that's just something where I believe I over-teched and maybe got, either the bad side of Tom, maybe the meta wrong. It's just something I wanted to have ready to go, but Earthen Vessel was, I don't want to say sorely missed, but it was definitely missed between her and mine's experience in the Masters division. And so let's talk about the pairings. These are the people I hit if you're interested in that. Everybody was super friendly and very nice. Actually, my last round opponent was my first round opponent last year in Knoxville. And it's just so funny to me because that's the first time I've ever hit somebody multiple times at an event. Like, not multiple times, but at an event, but multiple times in general. Like, they were my first opponent I've ever played twice at a regional. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then these were the matchups that I hit. Unfortunately, round one, we did hit Lugia with the Ogre Pond included in there. They also played the Raikou, so I'm not entirely sure about their full 60. My opponent was from Chile, and there was a Chilean Yu-Gi-Oh player, Lugia player, in the top 8, and I believe he was part of the group that traveled with them. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of similarities, if not the exact same deck list between them. So they got the better of me in game 3. Game 1, I scooped after 2 turns because, well, I knew they had the Lugia V-Star in their hand. I had no way of disrupting their hand, and only had one active Pokemon, my Rotom V. And after Insta-Charging turn 1, winning the coin flip, still drew into nothing after that. So 5 top decks all in all between the Insta-Charge and the draws, and unfortunately just was a non-go start. I could have done the funny thing and Turo's up to my own Rotom, but believe it or not, I didn't want to give away very much information at that point, so I didn't Turo's up my Rotom. I just scooped and said, I'll take first game 2. And then in game 2, we had a very good back and forth game, but I was able to bait them into taking 2 prizes with the Ogre Pond, so their prize map was going to be 2-2-2, which opened me up for a Briar play, even though I had to take time out of my game plan to knock out their Minccino Cinccino. Then while that usually is very detrimental, because they took the first 2 prizes and their prize map was going to continue to be that 2-2-2 for the 6 prizes total, I was able to make use of Briar and complete the comeback that way. And then in game 3, unfortunately, the variance got the best of me. He either had 1 or 2 boss's orders left in deck, depending on the boss count, and Roxanne was in fact a lie, as I trapped or attempted to trap a Blood Moon Ursaluna in the active and spread my damage counters. I needed 1 more turn, but they were able, off the Roxanne, to find not only the Jet Energy, but the boss's orders. So a very unfortunate way to end out a pretty good set there, honestly, if you exclude the non-game game 1. Game 2 was against Quad Thorns, and there's not too much to say about matching up into Quad Thorns, honestly, for Dragapult, I think. So long as you're playing at least 3 copies of Drakloak, you should be good to go. You just kind of want to slow and steady wins the race. If they hit heads on Pokemon Catcher, it can be slightly irritating. And if they hit heads on Crushing Hammer, it can be also a little irritating. But it's just a matter of knowing when to attach your energies and knowing when to attach your tool cards in that matchup. If you are able to read your opponent, kind of like, poker in a way. Not everybody has a poker face. And unfortunately for my opponent, they did not have a very good poker face. And so I was able to kind of tell what their game plan was based off of how they were playing their turn and how their future turns would look. And I used this information to my advantage. Mind games are an important part of any card game. And so I used that information and I was able to play around what their win conditions appeared to be and attach my energies and might use my rare candies effectively. They did play 1 TM Devo in their 60, which I thought was pretty interesting. But looking at other lists from this weekend that played Quad Thorns, TM Devo seemed to be a pretty standard inclusion across the board. Now, my next matchup was ultimately the deck that also eliminated Luke from making the finals for juniors, was Beta Dustmore. And this opponent was definitely a very good opponent. They knew exactly what they were doing. And I kind of had to learn this matchup on the fly. It's not something I practice, and I will honestly say that is towards my detriment. I should have practiced a bit more against this matchup because it is a very, very hard matchup. playing the Pidgeot version of Dragapult without the ghost, and I believe you cannot combine the two effectively. That gets way too clunky. You either need to play the Japanese 60 with just Dragapult and the ghosts, or you play a more streamlined version, the stapler version, I'm going to pin it here, of Dragapult with Pidgeot. And the Dragapult Pidgeot version, I think, actually has a bit of a harder time into this matchup because you're playing a more supporter-oriented version, it feels like, when you're using the Ghost version, because you're playing the Tatsugiri, so you have options and ways of finding those supporters more easily. Whereas against the Item Lock into Pidgeot version, I don't run Tatsugiri. There could be a way to include Tatsugiri, but only for this matchup, I don't think it's worth it. So I wouldn't be worried about that overall. But the way you approach this matchup is very interesting because you want to feed them single prizers, and you do so knowing that you're getting to take prize cards as they use their ghosts. So evolving to Drakloak, you are asking them to knock it out by using their ghosts at that point, right? And so you kind of have to do that, debate them into using their ghost for that while you're powering up Fezandipiti or preparing to power up Fezandipiti in the back. And once you have a large enough hand, you should hopefully have most of your trainers in your hand at that point, and you should be able to Iono and start attacking with Fezandipiti when you're only drawing 2 or 3 cards off the Iono, and hopefully not any or many trainer cards, because the Poltergeist attack does damage based off the trainer cards you have in hand. So with that being said, you can create a situation where they are unable to knock out your Fezandipiti and you're attacking for 200 damage plus weakness. And if they break the item lock by risking it for the biscuit attacking with Poltergeist, hopefully you're in a position where you have enough resources available to you that you're able to set up a Dragapult at that point or a Pidgeot to stabilize your board. And so I was able to do that in game 1. I kind of learned that line and that line of play on the fly, but they adapted to it in game 2 and in game 3. As they saw me getting prepared, they actually left me the Drakloaks and used their double Dustmore to knock out my Fezandipiti while keeping me in item lock, which prevented me from using Super Rod to get back the Fezandipiti, and it proved to be difficult to set up a Dragapult, unfortunately, because of the way they were playing Disruption, and they did hit the turn 1 item lock in game 3, unfortunately, which I believe there's a world where if they didn't hit heads on the Enveloping Shadows, that I could have set up at least Pidgeot on my turn 2, but unfortunately we will never know because that's not the timeline we are currently living in. And round 4, yes, you see correct, that is Arceus Giratina in the year 2024, one of the nicest opponents I played all day. They were super friendly and warm and very welcoming, and I would love if every opponent were like them because they were just such a bubbly personality. We did win game 1. We did lose game 2 because we forgot about Maximum Belt. I did not see what their ACESPEC was in game 1, and then in game 2, they got a Giratina V-Star and attached Maximum Belt to it, and I did not have a way of knocking it out at that point, so I just scooped and went to game 3. And knowing that they played Maximum Belt at that point and being aware of it, which again was on me, I should have been prepared for it, and I wasn't. I was able to adjust my game plan and be a bit more aggressive early game, so that way they didn't get a chance to use Giratina V-Star with Maximum Belt against me. Round 5, this is the only round that was frustrating, and it was probably against my best opponent of the day, one of the Keckler brothers. Andrew, very, very swell person, great human being. But unfortunately, the deck did not want to operate at all in game 1 or in game 2. At least in game 2, I was able to jet headbutt twice, so I felt like I did something. But game 1 was another game where I scooped on turn 2. There was just nothing I could do. I knew they had the attack and the knockout on. I had a Fezandipiti in the active, Rotom on the bench. I just knew that they had the knockouts they needed. And after Rotoming and trying my best to draw into pieces, because I did not get the Rotom out by choice, it was the only other basic in my hand, I would have probably gotten Pidgey out if I had an option to, because Pidgey has 60 HP as a basic, which means it's harder to keep alive against Dragapult's attack that Regidrago can copy. And I would have tried to establish Dreepies after that with, Pidgey, Arven, for Buddy-Buddy Poffin, etc., etc. But that did never happen. And so we scooped game 1. Game 2, like I said, I was able to get 1 energy in play, and this is where I really felt the damage of not having Earthen Vessel. If I had Earthen Vessel, I could have got the energy in play a lot sooner and potentially have won game 2. But again, that's another thing that we will just never know. This is the game that knocked me out of day 2 contention. And I'll be honest, I was a little down on myself. But at this point in the day, Kelsey was 4-1, so I could not have been any happier for her at that point. So while I was a little sad for myself, I was very happy for Kelsey. And then moving on to round 6, I hit a super awesome Pokédad playing a very crazy rogue deck. And I know it's going to be a fun time when I sit down across from my opponent and they tell me, hey, if I'm playing slow, just let me know. And if we go to time and you're winning, I'll give it to you. Like a reverse of a gentleman's agreement, kind of in a way it felt like. But they were super awesome. Got to talk to them about, their career and their kids quite a bit. And awesome person. And very fun deck, actually. They game 1 went my way pretty well, but game 2, after winning game 1, they're like, yeah, we'll just play game 2 for fun, but I'll give it to you. And I was like, oh, you don't have to do that, but thank you. And game 2 went down to the wire because I didn't know if they played Briar or not, and they had 7 energy on 1 Ogerpon at a point, and I was terrified of that Ogerpon. But also, it didn't make sense in the way the game was progressing for me to knock it out. I just kind of used it to soak damage up. And at one point, I was going to knock it out with Phantom Dive while I was on the bench, but he attached a Bravery Charm to it. And one of the, downsides of having such a tight 60 is that there's no room for Lost Vacuum, and there's certainly no room for Jamming Tower at this point because we are playing a tool card to help us as our ACESPEC. So that Bravery Charm came in clutch for them, but we were able to pull it out anyway. And then 7, Miraidon. One of the easier matchups for Dragapult, honestly. Just be aware of Raikou hitting for big damage, and you can't overbench. Raichu was included in their 60 along with that Mewtwo EX, but I never gave them an opportunity or a chance to fully utilize Raichu or the Raikou V. It's just a matter of, like I said, knowing how to avoid overbenching on yourself. In my last round, the dreaded Raging Bolt Ogerpon matchup for Dragapult. Game 1, I won't lie, my opponent just Pokestopped away 3 Professor Sadas after squawking and seizing away their Palpad. They valiantly tried to play it back, and they definitely had advantage. Like, I had a very slow start, and they had a very fast start, so I think they had already taken 3 prizes at a point where they Pokestopped their 3 Sadas away. But I was able to stabilize after they knocked out my first Dragapult. I started Lumineon, unfortunately. They knocked Lumineon out, and then they knocked out a Pidgey or a Radiant Alakazam is what I've forced up to the active, because Radiant Alakazam takes 2 energies to knock out, and I knew they had already played 1 Sadas, they hadn't played Sadas at that point, but they had manually attached to Pokemon. So at that point, I feed them Radiant Alakazam, they get rid of 2 energy off of an Ogerpon. I'm like, okay, great. And then they Pokestop right before they attack and get rid of 3 Sadas. I'm like, okay, this is good. Even though they're probably going to take at least 2 more prizes here and go down to 1 prize card needed, I know my game plan is not going to be to knock out the Raging Bolts. It's going to be to knock out the Ogerpons. I was able to pivot and come back from 5 prizes down to win the game 1 at that point. And then in game 2 was a much more even game, but I was able to make good use of Pokemon League Headquarters. Actually, it was so bad game 1, I was worried about getting donked that I played Pokemon League Headquarters down before I even fully understood what deck they were on. I just saw Squawkabilly in the active and I got to go first. I was like, I have nothing down here and nothing to do, so we're going to insta-charge, but I'm going to insta-charge with League Headquarters in play. So it was actually Rotom that I had in the active, not Lumineon. Good that I can remember that. Should have wrote down some more notes rather than just taking them on training court, but hey, what can you do? Because round 8 was a dub, so we bounced back after a rough morning to come back to 5-3. Very happy with that. And afterwards, we had to treat ourselves to some chewies. And so I treated Twitter to this awesome deck profile picture. Finally getting the max rarity on Dragapult. Love this deck so much. It is very well positioned currently in the meta. I personally believe the Pidgeot version, the stapler version, is the way to go with Dragapult, mainly because the deck wants to focus on tempo and controlling the tempo of the game more so than it wants to be aggressive. The attack of Dragapult makes a lot of sense with the Dusknoir math, but to make full use of the Dusknoir, you really have to have a pop off turn one. And I see why they play two Rotoms, because they typically want to go second with that version of the deck. And by the time you go second with the deck, you're giving a lot of opportunity to the Dusknoir decks, the Tropicoses, those more aggressive decks, even Charizard, and even this build of Dragapult, chances to build up their board state and get the first attack off. And well, without 70 HP existing for the Ghost, it's really hard to establish them after falling behind, because they just become such a big target and a liability at that point. And so I view the Ghosts are not truly worth it, even though the math and everything makes sense. I just don't feel like the Duskull line synergizes with the overall feel of the deck, because you want to control the tempo. You want to take multiple prize cards in a turn. We're not talking about 2, we're talking about at least 3 to 4 to even 5 from time to time, because those turns are possible with this deck. The EXP share stands out to me as a vital inclusion moving forward, and I do think you can cut the Force Psychic Energy for the Earthen Vessel. And if you want Manaphy, you can definitely put Manaphy in here. But I do believe the Pal Pad is super helpful. And like I said, Manaphy really ended up being a comfort card for Luke. And I think the Pal Pad offers so much value in being able to put things like the Boss's Orders, the Turos, even Crispin or an Arven back into your deck, depending on how the game progresses. Sometimes a late game Arven, getting the EXP share along with the Nest Ball for Fez, things like that can be totally game changing. So guys, that's it from me. I had a great time this weekend. GG's to all my opponents. And hey, hopefully next video we'll be covering Dragapult a bit more in depth if that's something you guys are interested in. Until then, take care. I'll see you guys later. Bye.